I received 5 letters with terrifying, but true stories. At first glance, they came from different towns across Alabama, different people, different moments, different lives. But they all shared the same dark thread, an ordinary day that suddenly twisted into something you'd never want to live through. From a late-night drive where a stranger's car would not stop following, to a quiet neighbor hiding a violent past, to children chased through abandoned strip mines by something inhuman, to a boyfriend who revealed he was still a killer, and finally, a brother and sister who barely escaped a kidnapping outside their own home. These stories still haunt the people who survived them. I will read them to you. The left turn that wasn't. In 2007 I was 30, juggling a PhD at the University of Florida and a mortgage on a small condo in Gainesville. A friend of mine, Miles, Captain Carter, was walking across the United States in long, stubborn increments. When winter pushed him off the road, I let him crash at my place. By February he was restless again and begged for a ride back to the exact patch of Alabama shoulder where he'd stopped. I had a day off, a full tank, and the selfish promise of my quiet condo once he was gone, so I said yes. Dropping him was simple. Finding my way back wasn't. Early GPS then was less a guide than a dare. On the way up we'd stuck to the interstate before peeling 10 miles into the pines. On the way back, my unit chirped out a faster route that stitched together county roads so narrowed the trees seemed to breathe on the glass. The sky bled from bruised purple to black. There were no houses, no porch lights, just the white zipper of my beams and a fluttering moth I kept mistaking for a headlight in the mirror. I'd driven alone at night plenty of times. Vigilance was a habit I wore like a seat belt. But somewhere south of wherever we were, I noticed a second pair of lights settle behind me. I told myself it was nothing. Someone else fed the same backroad breadcrumb trail by the same overeager algorithm. Then the miles passed, the lights never changed lanes, and the road stayed empty except for us. At the next tiny town there were 2 traffic lights almost on top of each other. I realized too late I was trapped in the left turn lane for the first one, when I needed the second. No big deal, I thought. It was 2 in the morning and the cross street was a ghost. When the arrow flipped green, I went straight through and took my left at the next light. The car behind me did the exact same thing. A thread snapped in my chest. I called my boyfriend, Evan, and tried to give him a mile marker that didn't exist. Hey, just look up a non-emergency number for... I squinted at a dark sign I couldn't read. Whatever county this is. He laughed softly the way people laugh when they've never had to weigh politeness against survival. Babe, it's Alabama. You've got a Florida plate frame that screams Go Gators. He's probably just messing with you. Call me when you hit the interstate. I'm low on gas, I said. That part arrived in my mouth like a confession. I'd been nursing the amber light, hoping for an Exxon to materialize out of pine needles. It hadn't. To stop meant to get out. To get out meant to be soft and human in a place designed to make you feel like a rumor. Then, get gas, he said, distracted. You'll be fine. I hung up without saying goodbye. The car behind me sat far enough back that I couldn't see a face, only the flat dark of tinted glass. Now and then a bend would bring our beams together, and the glare would erase everything. I tried to decide what a harmless explanation would look like and couldn't picture one that survived the wrong turn test. The asphalt finally widened, the tree line fell away, and I spilled into a low-lit commercial strip. 2 diners, a shuttered hardware store, a gas station glowing like a stage. I eased up to a red light under a sodium lamp and did something reckless and small. I turned in my seat, full body, and stared into the follower's windshield while pretending to talk on the phone. I exaggerated the shape of words. Black SUV plates. Driver, so my mouth would say what my courage wouldn't. I held the look the entire length of the red. The car idled. I couldn't see a person, but in my head I watched a face make calculations. Green. I rolled forward, crossed, and pulled into the gas station. I parked like a cop, driver's door aimed at the glass door of the store, nose angled for a clean exit. Keys out, purse tight, I sprinted inside. The attendant was a man in his 50s with a crossword, a coffee, and the tired kindness of someone who has seen too many versions of the same night. "You okay?" he asked before I'd reached the counter. I said, "Someone's been following me for an hour. 100 miles, maybe. Black SUV. Tinted." He stepped around the register and moved to the window. "Nobody out there," he said after a beat. I could feel the air leave me, not as relief but as a slow, dizzy drain. He was right behind me when I turned in. "Maybe saw you run inside and dipped," he said. "Either way, you're fine here. Pumps are on. You pay inside with me when you're done. I'll watch." The glass made a mirror of the night. I left my credit card with him, grabbed the nozzle, and forced myself to move like a person who did this all the time. The pump chattered, numbers blinked alive. When the back of my neck sparked, I looked up and saw only my own pale face reflected with the convenience store's candy-colored rows lined up behind it like a parade. Inside again, I handed him the receipt with a hand that wouldn't flatten. He slid my card back and, as if we were just two strangers talking weather, gave me directions to the interstate that sounded like a spell. "2 more lights, right at the bank, merge past the feed store, ramps on your left." I lingered. "Do you mind just standing there while I pull out?" He nodded and planted himself in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other lifting in a small salute when my headlights cut past. At the second light, I checked the mirrors. Nothing but empty lanes and the yellow dome of the station shrinking in the rearview. The interstate arrived like a river. I merged and drove with both hands at 10 and 2, all the way to the Florida line, no music, no phone, no voice but my own counting breath and green signs. Home came up quick and unreal. The condo door closed with a seal. When I finally texted Evan, the message I sent was not the one I'd rehearsed. It was 2 words. "I'm safe." Later, after the adrenaline slipped and left its shaky hangover, I tried to assign meaning to the missing face. Maybe it was exactly what I feared, a man who saw a woman driving alone through the back roads of Alabama and decided to see how far her fear would stretch. Maybe it was less than that, a bored kid or a drunk or a petty bully. The truth is, I don't care what he meant to do. The effect was the same. He made me small on purpose. When I think of that night now, I don't remember the darkness first. I remember the moment under the sodium lamp when I turned around and made my mouth say, "I see you," without saying it. I remember the attendant's easy, practical kindness, how safety can look like a man with a crossword stepping to a window. And I remember the geography of Alabama the way travelers remember wounds, the long, nameless roads, the twin lights where the left turn wasn't, and the way a stranger's car can teach you how quickly a map stops being a map and becomes a story you are determined to survive. The neighbor named Tony. In 2018 I was 27, broke, and living in a subsidized apartment complex on the west side of Birmingham, Alabama. Living is a generous word. The buildings were half-rotted, stairwells smelled of mildew and cigarette ash, and the plumbing rattled like a dying cough whenever anyone tried to shower. My job was maintenance, patching drywall with dollar store spackle, tightening bolts on doors that would never lock properly, unclogging pipes full of things I didn't want to name. $200 a week, and most of it went straight back into rent. That's where I met my neighbor, Anthony, Tony, Yazzie. He was Native American, late 30s, maybe early 40s. Average height, compact build, always with that faint air of someone who didn't belong in places like ours. He dressed cleaner than the rest of us, iron shirts instead of ripped hoodies, steel-toed boots that looked new. When he first moved in, he kept quiet, nodding politely when we crossed paths in the breezeway. Then he joined the maintenance crew, and suddenly we were working side by side, fixing the same sinks and patching the same holes. Tony wasn't a chatterbox. Most of the time he kept to himself, but a few lines of cocaine changed that. After a bump he would lean back, eyes half shut, and start telling stories. At first they were small, childhood scraps in Minnesota, bar fights, women who broke his heart. Then they got darker. He claimed there was a Native American mafia in the upper Midwest, an underground family that ran casinos, lent out money, and collected debts with fists, blades, or worse. I laughed the first time he said it, assuming he was high and trying to impress me. But his face didn't crack. He had this stillness when he spoke, this half-smirk like he was replaying something behind his eyes. "Different world up there," he muttered once. "On the reservation, rules don't work the way you think they do." I shrugged it off. Everyone in these apartments had stories. Ex-cons, wannabe hustlers, people who reinvented themselves because their old lives had already collapsed. Tony was just another voice in the choir. Then came the night everything tipped. We were supposed to meet a guy for coke. Usual deal, $20, quick handoff, nothing fancy. When we got to the spot, the dealer's cousin called and said our man had been arrested. Tony cursed, then said he knew someone else. Minutes later another car rolled up. Tony leaned through the window with our money. Something went wrong, voices sharp, the driver trying to pull away. Tony's arm shot inside, dragging the man half out of his own seat. I swear I've never seen someone hit that hard. Fist after fist, like he was trying to punch through bone. The man's head bounced off gravel, blood spraying. I shouted for him to stop. Tony glanced back at me with eyes so cold they didn't look human. "Check his pockets," he barked. I froze. I didn't want the blood on my hands, literally or otherwise. I begged him to let it go, to run. Finally, with one last savage kick, he stepped back. We fled into the night. Afterward, I couldn't shake the image. His boots grinding flesh into dirt. His grin, yes, a grin, while he did it. I asked him later what the hell that was about. He said it like it was nothing. "Guy tried to stiff me. Can't let that slide. People remember weakness." From then on, I listened differently when Tony talked. He'd drop little bombs while fixing a faucet or laying tile. Schemes with casino money. People who couldn't pay. Checks cashed in other names. Once he described a social security racket so casually I had to stop working. 6 of them going at once, he said. Till somebody talked. He sipped his beer like he just mentioned the weather. Part of me wondered if it was all lies, stories cooked up to make him look dangerous. But another part of me had seen the way his knuckles tore into a man's face, the way his voice dropped flat when he said, "They won't do a damn thing." 3 months later, the truth walked through our doors in the shape of U.S. Marshals. It was after midnight when the crash came, louder than anything I'd heard, wood splintering, boots pounding. My apartment lit up with red and blue strobes. I opened the door and froze at the sight of a rifle leveled in my direction. "Back inside!" The marshal barked. I obeyed, shaking, heart clawing at my ribs. By morning, Tony's door was hanging off its hinges. The manager told me the story over her first cigarette of the day. Tony had been living under an assumed identity. He was wanted for federal crimes linked to fraud, assault, maybe worse. He'd slipped into this government-subsidized complex with forged papers and charmed his way into a job working maintenance, paid, ironically, by the same government trying to hunt him. "They say he hurt a lot of people," she whispered, almost reverent. "You lived next to a monster." I tried to find details later. There was nothing on the news. No headlines, no mugshots. The whole thing buried, or maybe never meant to see daylight. I checked Google. Nothing. Not even a whisper about the raid. That's when the dread set in, not just about Tony, but about how many Tonys there must be. Men hiding in plain sight, slipping into the cracks of Alabama's broken housing projects. Neighbors you nod to in stairwells, men you share cigarettes with on breezeways, who might carry entire histories soaked in blood and lies. When I think back now, I remember Tony's laugh, low, humorless, bubbling up only after a line of coke. I remember the way his eyes hollowed out when he told me about collections. And I remember the silence of that complex after the marshals left, how every door stayed shut, how every neighbor looked at the ground. Because in places like that, survival means you don't ask questions. And maybe, deep down, we already knew Tony's stories weren't just stories. The Man by the Lake. In the summer of 1999, when I was 12, my best friend Peter Lawson and I spent almost every waking hour exploring the strip mines outside our small Alabama town. To us, they were a paradise, abandoned quarries full of water where we could swim, cliffs to climb, dirt roads that wound for miles like forgotten trails. Our parents warned us about snakes, sinkholes, and old machinery, but we were kids. Danger just meant adventure. One Saturday morning, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, Peter and I decided to take a dirt road neither of us had seen before. It cut away from the main gravel path and dove deeper into the woods. At the end of a mile we found a lake, small but perfectly still, its banks lined with cattails and frogs that scattered at the sound of our sneakers. We crouched by the water, tossing pebbles, watching a turtle dip under the surface. Then I noticed movement on the far side of the lake. A man was walking away from us, climbing up the slope. At first I thought he was a fisherman heading home, but there was no pole, no bucket, just him, his boots kicking dust. "Who's that?" I whispered. Peter squinted. "Dunno. Nobody lives out here." We both stood up. That was our mistake. The man froze mid-step, turned, and sprinted straight at us. I swear I've never seen anyone move that fast. He barreled down the hill, arms pumping, his body eating up the 300 yards between us like it was nothing. Peter shouted, "Run!" and we bolted, crashing through brush back toward the road. My lungs burned, heart jackhammering. When I dared a glance over my shoulder, I saw him closing the distance, his face twisted, teeth bared. And in his right hand, God help me, he was clutching an entire cooked chicken. Not a drumstick. Not leftovers. A full roasted chicken, greasy and torn, clutched like a weapon. We dove off the dirt road into a ditch choked with weeds and lay flat, barely breathing. The man reached the spot we just abandoned and stopped. He spun in circles, grunting, making guttural noises that didn't sound human. His clothes were filthy, shredded overalls, boots caked in mud. His brow jutted out in a heavy ridge, giving his face a primitive, brutal look. 30 feet. That's all that separated us from him. If he looked down, he would have seen two terrified boys trembling in the grass. Instead, after what felt like forever, he let out a sharp grunt and ran back the way he'd come, disappearing into the trees. We didn't move for nearly an hour. Every crunch of a branch made me flinch. At last, we crawled along the ditch until we reached the main road, then sprinted all the way home. When we burst into Peter's house, our fathers and his older brothers grabbed rifles and went searching. They found nothing. No tracks, no man, no sign anyone had been there. For years that day haunted me. Who runs through the woods with a roasted chicken in hand, chasing children? Was he insane? Homeless? Something worse? A few months later, I found a clue that made everything worse. My dad and I were riding dirt bikes near those same mines when I spotted a wooden crate half hidden in brush. Inside was a nest of hay, a tattered blanket, and a pillow. Someone had been living out there. My dad frowned, looked around, then told me in a voice that brooked no argument. "If someone's staying out here, they don't want to be found. Let's go." That night he sat on the porch in the dark, shotgun across his lap, staring toward the tree line. He never explained why, and he never did it again. Years later, when I told the story to my girlfriend's grandmother, who, coincidentally, lived near those mines, her face turned grim. "Y'all are lucky," she said. "Plenty of bad things happen out there." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. I still see him sometimes in dreams. That crooked run, the greasy chicken, the way his eyes swept the road searching. Maybe he was just a man who lost his mind in the woods. Or maybe he was hunting. Either way, if Peter and I had hesitated a second longer by that lake, I don't think I'd be here to tell you about the man in the mines of Alabama. The night at Daniel's apartment. I grew up in a small town in Alabama where everybody knew your business before you even spoke it aloud. After graduating high school, I started dating a man a few years older than me. His name was Daniel Brooks. He was tall, broad-shouldered, handsome in that dangerous way that makes you ignore your better judgment. From the beginning, Daniel was honest, or so it seemed. On our first date, he told me he had once been involved with a gang. He explained it like a phase, the way some people admit to smoking or shoplifting as teenagers. Wrong place, wrong crowd, he said. But I'm out now. I don't live like that anymore. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was polite, held doors open, made me laugh. He treated me better than boys my age who were still trying to figure themselves out. For a few weeks, dating him felt like stepping into adulthood. Then came the night that changed everything. It was the first time I agreed to stay at his apartment. He lived in a small unit on the edge of the city. At first, it seemed normal: beer in the fridge, a couch with worn cushions, an old TV buzzing in the corner. But when his best friend dropped by that evening, things started to feel off. The friend, Elias, was covered in tattoos and carried himself with the same swagger Daniel sometimes slipped into. He was friendly enough to me, but in the middle of our conversation he casually admitted he had also been in a gang. Not just any gang, but one that Daniel's old crew had supposedly hated. He said it like a joke, but his eyes never left mine. Something in my stomach tightened. Why would Daniel invite me to stay over for the first time, and then have his gang-affiliated friend come by? Why was this suddenly part of the conversation? After Elias left, Daniel seemed restless, pacing the apartment. He invited me into his bedroom, and that's when the second red flag hit me square in the chest. His closet wasn't filled with clothes. It was an armory. I saw it when he opened the door to grab a jacket. On the floor were stacked ammo boxes. On the shelves, body armor, grenades, and at least 2 rifles. One looked like an AK-47. Propped against the wall were smaller weapons, handguns, knives, and something that looked disturbingly like a homemade pipe bomb. I froze, staring. He caught me looking and didn't even flinch. Instead, he pulled out a handgun and placed it gently on the bed beside us. "Protection," he said simply. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe he was joking, or maybe I had misunderstood what I was seeing. But Daniel didn't laugh. He sat down next to me, his expression calm, almost too calm. "That gang I told you about," he said slowly. "I never really left." I didn't breathe. "I'm still useful to them," he went on. "Sometimes they need things done. I take care of it. Not often. But if the money's right, I do it." He looked me dead in the eyes as he said the words, like he was talking about mowing lawns instead of killing people. His voice was flat, his eyes cold. I managed to nod, pretending to understand, pretending not to be horrified. Inside, my thoughts were screaming. He's not exaggerating. He's not trying to scare me. He's telling me the truth. Every instinct in me wanted to grab my bag and run, but I stayed. I stayed because something told me that if I reacted wrong, if I showed fear or disgust, he might see me differently. I had no proof he'd hurt me, but I had just looked into a closet full of proof that he could. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We ate takeout on the couch. He watched TV. I forced myself to laugh at his jokes. Every sound outside made my heart race. When he finally fell asleep, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many people had closed their eyes near Daniel Brooks and never opened them again. The next morning, sunlight felt like salvation. He offered to make breakfast. I smiled, declined, and left with some excuse about errands. I never went back. Daniel didn't chase me. He didn't call to ask why. Maybe he knew I had seen too much. Maybe, in his own twisted way, he thought confessing would bind me to him. But I couldn't pretend. Not after what I had heard, not after what I had seen in that closet. It's been years since that night, but the memory sticks like a splinter. Not the weapons, not even his confession. What I remember most is his eyes. Calm. Dead. As if telling me he was still a hitman was no different than telling me he worked at a hardware store. That's when I learned something about true fear. It isn't the shout in the dark, or the stranger in an alley. It's sitting across from someone you thought you could trust, someone who smiled at you, kissed you, called you beautiful, and realizing you're looking into the face of a killer. The couple by the mailboxes. It was the summer of 1986, and I was 10 years old, living with my family in a small subdivision on the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama. Our neighborhood was tight-knit and almost entirely black. Every family knew every child, every grandmother waved from her porch, and every set of parents kept an eye on whoever happened to be running down the street. Our duplex sat on a hill directly behind the rental office. On the front wall of that office was a row of metal mailboxes, the kind you opened with tiny silver keys that always felt too small in your hand. Getting the mail was my favorite chore. It made me feel grown up, responsible. On that day, I decided to take my little sister, Angela, with me. She was only 6, with her hair in braids and a habit of asking a million questions. The sun was bright, the air thick with the hum of cicadas, when we skipped down the hill to the office. I fiddled with the key, pulled open our box, and started sorting through envelopes when a car rolled up in front of the building. It was a beige sedan with out-of-state plates. Inside sat a white couple, middle-aged, dressed like Sunday churchgoers. This, in itself, was strange. In our neighborhood back then, you didn't see white folks. The city was segregated in practice if not in law, and the other side of the tracks wasn't just a figure of speech. The woman in the passenger seat rolled down her window, smiling in a way that made the hair on my arms prickle. "Excuse me, sweethearts," she called. "Could you come here for a second? We need directions." I froze. Every assembly at school, every warning from our parents, every cartoon PSA had drilled the same phrase into our heads: stranger danger. I turned back toward Angela, who had already taken a few curious steps toward the car. "Come on, it's just a question," the woman coaxed, her voice syrupy sweet. Angela's small sneakers crunched on gravel. "Don't," I hissed, grabbing her wrist. "Let's go." "But," she started. "Run!" I snapped, pulling her hand. My voice cracked in a way that startled even me. The woman leaned farther out the window. "Oh, don't be shy. Just one little question." That's when the driver's door slammed open. The man stepped out, his face red, his voice sharp and commanding. "Hey! Get back here!" We didn't look back. We sprinted up the hill, legs burning, hearts racing. Angela was crying, stumbling as I yanked her along. Gravel slid under our shoes as we clawed our way to the top. Halfway up I dared a glance. The man had taken a few steps toward us but stopped at the bottom of the hill. He stood there, fists clenched, staring up at us with something that wasn't anger so much as frustration, like a hunter losing his catch. At the top of the hill I turned, adrenaline making me reckless, and shouted the only thing I could think of. "Too slow! You can't catch us!" I even stuck out my tongue, like I was mocking some playground rival. He scowled, muttered something I couldn't hear, and walked back to the car. The woman was still smiling when the sedan pulled away, her face turned toward us as if she wanted me to remember it. Angela and I ran inside. My mother wasn't home, and in my childish mind I convinced myself it wasn't important enough to tell anyone. Maybe they really had needed directions. Maybe we'd overreacted. It wasn't until years later, as a teenager, that I replayed that memory with the clarity of hindsight. The friendly wave, the coaxing voice, the sudden bark of authority when kindness didn't work, it all fit the pattern I'd seen in news stories about child abductions. They hadn't been lost. They hadn't wanted directions. They'd wanted us. When I finally told my mother what had happened, her face drained of color. She gripped my shoulders so tightly it hurt. "Do you understand how close that was?" she whispered. I nodded, though I don't think I really did until much later. Now, as an adult, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't grabbed Angela's hand. What if she had taken those last few steps to the open car window? Would the man have pulled her inside? Would I have been dragged too? Would two children from a small black neighborhood in Alabama have simply vanished into a headline? Or worse, into nothing at all, just another pair of names whispered about but never found? The thought makes my stomach twist. When I walk past that old hill today, grown and tall, I still see the mailbox glinting in the sun. I still hear Angela's breathless questions and feel the weight of her wrist in my hand. And I still remember the man's voice, sharp as a whip, shouting across the gravel. "Hey! Get back here!" We didn't. And that's the only reason I'm still here to tell this story. Let me know what you think in the comments. This was Tell Me What Happened. I'll see you in the next story.